Let's continue our conversation on Stoicism. We had finished the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and I was thinking about what to do next. Now, in my mind, there are 3.5 great Roman Stoics. I'll explain what I mean by the 0.5 especially. We started off with Epictetus. Epictetus, famous for the Enchiridion, commonly known as the handbook or the manual. That's what we went through in the first batch of videos on Stoicism, but also the discourses, a much longer text consisting of 8 books, but unfortunately books 5 through 8 have been lost to time, so we only have access to books 1 to 4 and a couple of fragments from, I think, book 5 or something. But we have done the Enchiridion. Then we went on to Marcus Aurelius, that I think is the second great Roman Stoic. Epictetus himself was born in Turkey, what is now Turkey, but was a slave and lived in Rome and served a master who actually was a secretary to the Emperor Nero. Now, around that same time, there was another great Stoic in Rome called Seneca. And in my mind, that trifecta of Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca makes up 3 great Stoics. Now, I also said 0.5. There is another one, Musonius Rufus. And Musonius Rufus actually was the teacher who inspired Epictetus to become a philosopher and then start his own school of philosophy once he became a freedman. Now, the problem with Musonius Rufus is that most of his texts, as far as we know, he didn't write anything down himself, but just like with Epictetus in the discourses, there was a student who wrote down Musonius's lectures, but most of those texts have been lost, and that's why I say he is the 0.5. I think he had great ideas. For example, he wrote on, now this is ancient Roman times, he wrote on such topics as premarital sex, about how women should also study philosophy. This was very revolutionary stuff for that time. But as I said, we only have fragments. So I would like to cover him. There is a book available with a translation of the fragments. But I thought that maybe first we would do something else. And that third person is Seneca. Now, to give you a little bit of a background on Seneca, Seneca is, I think, in many ways complicated. He was a tutor to the Emperor Nero. And Nero was pretty much clinically insane. And this immediately leads to some problems. Seneca was banished twice in his lifetime and was ordered to commit suicide by Nero because he was involved in some plot. He may or may not have been involved in that plot, but again, oops, sorry, I hit my microphone. I'm sorry about that. But Nero was insane, and he made Seneca commit suicide in not the most pleasant of manners. Now, having said that, there are a couple of things I always find difficult about Seneca. First and foremost, he identifies as a Stoic. In his writings, for example, he uses the term nostri in Latin. Nostri meaning something like ours, our people, right? When he refers to the Stoics, which is a pretty clear indication that he considers himself a Stoic. Having said that, he also liberally quotes from Epicurus in his writings. And if there are 2 schools of philosophy that really cannot be united, then it's Stoicism on the one hand and Epicurus's work on the other hand. Those are diametrical opposites. So that's always a little complicated. So when we talk about Seneca from the viewpoint of learning about Stoicism, it's wise to keep in mind that he really was quite eclectic, and although he may have claimed to have been a Stoic, he has definitely read the work of other philosophical schools. Now, in itself, that's not a bad thing, because when you're dealing with something as complicated as philosophy, how to lead a good life. Of course, it's very wise to read multiple schools and then learn about what all these different kinds of schools claim on how to lead a proper life. My only difficulty with that is that this is not uncommon. It's what a lot of people do this day and age as well. For example, when it comes to religion, I like this of Christianity, but I like this of a more philosophical viewpoint from Buddhism, and I like this. But then I find, and that's just my opinion, that you kind of end up being nothing. Because you don't fully do the one thing, you don't fully do the other, you do a little bit of both. Or all three, or all four, etc. So this is something to bear in mind. The second problem, I think, with Seneca is that he was something that today we would refer to as an investment banker. And he was one of the first. And that meant that he was very rich. He had a lot of money and a lot of estates. The argument has been raised that it's very easy to be a Stoic about all sorts of things when you, so to speak, have a couple million in the bank, which in modern, if you would convert his fortune to modern day money, that probably is what you're talking about, a couple of million. So it's very easy, right, to not be bothered by anything if you can buy your way out of whatever happens to you. Now, of course, a similar argument could be raised about Marcus Aurelius. The only thing is, and that's the third and final point I'm going to raise about Seneca, that Marcus Aurelius appears, as far as we know, to really have lived the principles of Stoicism, appears to have truly been the Aristotle's philosopher king. Seneca has done some things that, morally speaking, are a little dubious. For example, he was tutor to Nero. Nero was an insane emperor who assassinated, who tortured, who killed, who did all kinds of very unpleasant things. And yet Seneca chose to keep serving him. And if you are a Stoic, then the central aspect of your philosophy should be virtue, doing the right thing, and serving a tyrant, right? Supporting a tyrant like that. That's not really a virtuous thing. Now, you could, of course, raise the counter-argument and say, yeah, how much choice did he really have? I mean, again, he was banished twice. He ended up having to commit suicide. So it's also not that Nero was particularly nice to him, right? So we do have to take that into account. I'm just saying that because I think it's important when you interpret his writings, or you try to interpret his writings, to bear all these things in mind. Now, the final things that I can say about Seneca, there is a fun fact that I believe it was his older brother who actually shows up in one of the Acts of the Apostles, because he was an important politician in a specific part of the world, and it's actually mentioned in the Bible. So that is not this Seneca that we're talking about, but I believe that was his older brother. There was supposedly a set of letters that were exchanged between the Apostle Paul and this Seneca. Those letters have been shown to be fakes, though. So if you come across that, that's not real and not really grounded in history. That was just someone who faked letters. The final thing I will say is Seneca has written a lot, and he spent 3 years of his life writing many things. That includes some plays, that includes some essays, some of which he wrote while he was banished. There are some outstanding essays. De Tranquilitate, on tranquility, is a very good one. De Ira, on anger, is a very good one. Dealing with anger. His plays are interesting, but I don't want to go over that stuff. The reason being twofold. One, the essays, the moral essays, often are very long and not necessarily divided into chapters, so it's a very long text. There would be no way to cover that in one video. The second aspect of that is that those essays are written in the spirit of that age, and that means a lot of rhetoric. They're interesting to read. They're still very legible. I think you can get some very good thoughts from those essays, but to cover them in videos like this is very difficult. So, the final writings, in addition to the plays and the moral essays that Seneca wrote and that I would like to go over with you, is the collection of the letters on ethics. Now, we're not going to start today because this is already 10 minutes and this is just an introduction, but we'll start next week. The moral letters, or the letters on ethics as they're often referred to, were written to a gentleman, a younger person called Lucilius. And what Seneca does in those letters is pretty much explain Stoic philosophy in a very thematic manner. So he writes to Lucilius to clarify specific philosophical concepts, to explain how you can interpret those Stoic concepts, how you can apply them to your life, how you should be living your life. And what I do find interesting is that, again, fairly liberally, he also quotes Epicurus and the Epicureans. And every time he also, I say every day, he regularly makes a point of, you also have to study what the other guys are doing, right? You also have to take into account what these guys say you should be doing. And here is why we, right, our people, the Stoics, would disagree with that. Or here's what we would say in response to that. And one thing that's, I think, very interesting about Seneca is that he was a very gifted author. His work, even now, after centuries, is easy to read in a proper translation because he wrote in Latin, but it reads super easily. It's not incredibly old-fashioned. It's again, those moral essays, they have quite a bit of rhetoric, but these letters they read like something that one of your friends could have written you. And after so many centuries, I think that's very interesting. It really gives you a feeling for the personality of Seneca. So, that was the introduction. I think that covers it. Some of the letters are half a page. Some of the letters are multiple pages. I may not read every single letter. The translation I will be using is by Margaret Graver and Anthony Long. These are two professors. Anthony Long is one of the world experts in Stoicism now, Professor Emeritus. He was the same author whose translation of the Enchiridion I used for the earliest videos in this series. So, there was not a lot of actual Stoic stuff in this video, but I thought it would be interesting to tell you a little bit about Seneca so that you get a bit of a feeling for the person that will be studying for the next months, most likely, because this is going to be, as you can see, there's a lot of letters. Again, I'm not going to cover them all, but still, we'll get something out of it. I hope that this was also interesting to just have that introduction, and because I feel that I should say something Stoic, I think one of Seneca's wonderful quotes that I can give you my top 3 of his quotes that I love in no particular order, but at least to start thinking a little bit about his writing style and to have some sort of content to this beyond just a short history lesson on Seneca. One of his quotes that I really love is from one of his moral essays, and he wrote, "Only speak the truth, but only to those people who can handle it." And when you think about it, that's a really interesting thing to say, right? You should always be truthful. But not everyone can handle the truth, so you still have to be careful with what you say to which person. I always think that's interesting, and that's one that we should remember, right? Because when someone does tell you the truth, it's not always easy to hear. So I think it's interesting. Second quote that I really like is, "The true profit of virtuous deeds lies in the doing, and the only reward of virtue is virtue. Again, that's one of his moral essays too, and that really emphasizes that aspect of virtue is most important, but virtue is also its own reward. By doing virtuous things, you will be a better person, and that is very rewarding. And you will be rewarded through just doing that, just being that person, doing the right thing. And the third quote that I find really nice, it's from one of his plays, but I've always felt that a very powerful quote that has resonated very well with me. It runs in Latin, tacere multis discitur vitae malis. The art of silence is a lesson taught by life's many sufferings. Going through things, going through unpleasant things is hard, but it is through those sufferings that you will learn to be able to keep your peace, to be quiet. You don't always have to talk. You listen more than you talk. You can be quiet, and that's okay. And that's the end of my quick introduction. I hope this is still interesting. Next week, we're going to start with letter number 1. I hope to see you then, and then we're going to dive in. Thank you for watching this. I always really appreciate it. I'm very excited to start on Seneca, so I hope that, I know that a lot of you have really been following these videos, for which I'm very grateful. So I hope that you're also excited to start on a new author and see what we can learn from Seneca's writings. I'll see you next week.